In movies, hacking is depicted as green text on a monitor. Maybe you're hacking with some of your hacking buddies all in a group, and maybe there's some scenes with you entering the Matrix and doing all this cool stuff with colors flying everywhere and cool visuals, right? In reality, hacking can be as simple as mistyping a URL. As we see in this example here, I mistyped Google by forgetting a second G and it brought me to an entirely different site. Now in this case, this site doesn't look particularly malicious, but this is called typo squatting, when you accidentally mistype a domain and go to a completely different site. A lot of attackers can use this for malicious purposes, which we will talk about throughout this video. Now one thing you might be wondering is, how do malicious attackers figure out which domains are available? And what I mean by that is, let's say an attacker is trying to trick you into clicking on their website and navigating to their website instead of apple.com. How would they know whether or not a domain like Apple with 1P, how would they know if that's available? One challenge for hackers is that when it comes to domains, a lot of times big companies will buy up all of the different domains that are close to theirs. For example, we have apple.com. You all know when I click enter, it's going to bring me to apple.com. But what you might not have known is if you type in Apple with 1P and do .com and hit enter, that'll also bring you to apple.com. The reason why big companies do this is to reduce the amount of typo squatting domains available, right? So an attacker can no longer trick you with Apple with 1P, right? Now that's owned by Apple itself, so that's no longer problematic. So this poses a unique challenge to hackers, and hackers do like challenges. The challenge is, how do we find out all of the different domains that are available and are close to the actual domain we're trying to mimic, right? How do we do that and not have to go through manually Apple with 3Ps, Apple with no Ps, right? All of the different letter combinations that are possible. This is where a tool called URL Crazy comes into play. And before I show installation and how to use it, I'm just going to run us through the help page so you can get a feel for what it does. Right? So if I type in URL Crazy -help and hit enter, we can see that this command not only has cool ASCII art, as a lot of the hacker commands tend to have, but it also allows us to generate and test domain typos in different variations in order to perform typo squatting, right? So this is a tool that attackers will use to save time instead of manually going through and looking, all right, can we get the Google domain with 2 E's, right? They're going to use a tool like this, which will automatically go through with all of these different letter variations that are similar to the original domain and figure out which ones are open to be purchased and used for typo squatting. Now it's time for the tool's installation. And of course, I'm using a variation of Linux. I'm using Kali Linux, right? So depending on which Linux machine you use, you might have different nuances in the installation. But the first thing that I like to do, just to make sure I have the most up-to-date packages to install from, I'm going to type in sudo apt update. That's going to run very quickly for me just because I've done this before. For you all, it might take a little bit longer. And then I'm going to do sudo apt install and then the name of our tool, which in this case is URL Crazy. So we got sudo, right? Once again, super users do command. Apt, this is our install command word, and then the name of the package we are installing and hitting enter. It's going to do some stuff for us, and for you all, it'll probably prompt you and say, hey, Y or N, do we want to download this? Just hit Y and then enter again, and you'll be good to go. So now I have my tool. Keep in mind, there may be a couple troubleshooting steps that you may encounter. So we're going to run through those really quick, and then I'm going to go through the actual usage of this tool. After installing, one of the most common issues that you might face is when you type in URL crazy -help, or honestly, if you do it with basically any example, right? Instead of getting the correct output like we see here, right? This is the correct output. It may throw you a bunch of errors. One of those errors may look like what we got over here. Failed to build gem native extension neo4r gem, right? So basically what this error is telling us is that there's some package that we need to install, right? And all you're going to have to do is run gem install neo4r, right? So I'm going to go back, clear this out. Now just run this command. It's going to tell me I don't have permissions to do this, right? You might think, oh man, another error. But once again, all we have to do to run anything with permissions is going to be to use sudo in this case. Oop, I forgot to put gem in front. Gem, and then we are good to go. Right, so what you're going to do in order to troubleshoot this particular error, right, this is going to be the most common one people face. If you get any errors like this where it says failed to build gem native extension and it gives you the extension name, just type in sudo gem install extension name. For me, it did that for 2 extensions, right? So first was Neo4R, and then the second one, I think it asked me to do for, let's look. I had to do it for hit times, whatever that is. Right, so just keep in mind, running these commands will fix those errors for you, right? So before we got into usage at all, just want to get ahead of those issues so you all can properly use the tool. Now that we have all the debugging out of the way, here is the actual usage. So I'm just going to type in, very simply, URL crazy, and then the domain that I want to run the tool on, which in this case will be google.com. And once again, all this tool is going to do is it's going to automatically take google.com and it's going to try to find all of the similar variations it can. Let's say Google with 1 O, Google with 2 Gs, right? It's going to find all of these different variations that could possibly be used for typo squatting, right? So it's checking, 1, how similar are they to the original domain, google.com? And 2, it's checking if the domain is open and purchasable. So we're going to run this command, and it will take a couple minutes, right? It's going to be querying quite a bit here. And boom goes the dynamite. So we have all of our results right here, and it's going to tell us actually quite a bit of information. The first thing it's going to say is it's going to say what it did to our output in order to make it as similar as possible to the domain, but to make sure that it was different, right? In this case, they use character insertion. They inserted an H, right? So we did google.com. And we can actually see here, by the fact that these 2 rows are empty, that this is an open domain that an attacker could buy and use for typo squatting. Right, so just to confirm that, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go over to our favorite Fox, Firefox, paste it in, and it's going to give us something like about having trouble finding the site, right? So we know this is actually an available name for an attacker to purchase and to trick users into clicking on. Now let's use a different one. Let's use GoogFLE. So this one's actually using a name server, right? It has a name server assigned to it, which means that it's in use, which means that it could also be malicious, right? So we're going to copy this, paste it, and let's see if we actually go to Google or not. All right, as you can see, we go to Care Plus. When I try to hit back, it doesn't let me, right? So this site, it's a little suspicious. You know, maybe we could put this into virus total if we really wanted to. I'll do it real quick just to see if anything comes up. You know, but I have my suspicions of any site that uses typo squatting to get its traffic, right? So let's look. All right, well, it looks like the site comes up as clean, but still weird that they use typo squatting for it, and still weird that they wouldn't let me back out of it. Now, if we go to this, right, you're going to actually notice that if we scroll, let's do some scrolling all the way out here, up. You're going to notice that some of these, for example, they have name servers attached to them, but they're actually just Google, which have purchased them so that users wouldn't get confused. For example, Google with 1 O was actually purchased. This domain was purchased by Google. So when you type enter, it brings you to Google. Now, the obvious question is, why would Google purchase all of these different domains? I believe like almost all of these like top 10 have been purchased from Google themselves. The reason for that is because Google wants to reduce the amount of times that their users are typo squatted. Now, this may not be the case for smaller websites, right? Like, let's say you go to runescape.com, right? RuneScape probably doesn't have as many domains, or they haven't purchased as many domain names because it's expensive and, you know, maybe they just didn't think about security as much, right? That's just an assumption, but smaller websites will be less likely to have and have purchased more and more of these domains to keep their users safe. Now, the question still remains, if you are successfully typo squatted and tricked and deceived, what happens next? Well, the answer is a lot of things, right? A lot of things can happen next. What we saw previously in that KubeCare ad that I showed you before in RuneScape was that they could actually advertise to you, which isn't the worst thing in the world. I don't love it, but isn't the worst thing. But what could happen that's even worse is, let's say you have a fake Facebook website, right? Maybe the attacker uses the domain Facebook with 1 O, right? What they can do is they could set up a form that looks identical to Facebook.com's form that we see here. And then when you type in your email and your password and hit enter, the credentials actually go to the attacker to steal, right? So that is one very real possibility of typo squatting. Typo squatting, it's very dangerous and you have to be careful, right? Which is why tools like this need to be known, understood, and as a user, you need to understand that The attackers are coming in with quite a bit of knowledge going into their attacks. So, in conclusion, couple big lessons. One, there is a tool called URL Crazy, which will make typo squatting easier for attackers. And two, because of the fact that tools like this exist, you need to be as careful as ever when you are navigating the web, right? And I'd actually recommend in a lot of cases, instead of using this URL bar up here where you have to be exact or else you get misled, right? For example, runescape.com, right? We see that we can get misled on that and not go to the real site. What I'd actually recommend for most people is probably just typing into Google itself, right? Typing into the search bar itself. Let the search engine usher you to safer sites. It's not perfect, right? But it's more perfect than going straight to the URL bar and mistyping something. So thank you all for watching, and as any good YouTuber would say at the end of the video, smash that subscribe button, hit that like button, do whatever you need to do. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.